first two mods that we will be talking about are drift and float. Let's go over drift first. High percentages going in either direction will make a wider horizontal range in which the targets, and by extension the notes, move back and forth. Now let's take a look at float. Similar to drift, high percentages going in either direction will produce a greater vertical range. However, there is a weird side effect that happens with float that isn't present in drift. If the targets are above their natural vertical position, any fade mods that are in effect, such as fade out, invisible, or blink, will be nulled if they pass that point. Let's move on to dizzy. Starting with the basics, positive percentages make the notes spin counterclockwise, while negative percentages make the notes spin clockwise. 628% dizzy makes the notes spin exactly one full rotation per beat. To provide a clear demonstration, here is a sample chart with stops on every quarter note. Now, let's see a chart with a stop on every eighth note. And finally, every 16th note. You will also notice that when you first activate dizzy, the notes will kind of wind up, spinning the opposite direction before stabilizing the rotation. Adding to that, notes further away from the targets will have more of a wind up than notes that are closer to the targets. This is because all arrows end on a 0-degree rotation, relative to their respective targets. I'll simplify this example by explaining in terms of rotations. Using the formula of 628% dizzy equals 1 rotation per quarter note, we have 4 notes here, each note being 1 quarter note further away from the targets than the previous one. Watch the notes closely as they rotate. Dizzy also works very well for extremely high percentages. Alright, so that about covers it for dizzy. Now let's take a look at mini. Negative percentages do what you would expect. They zoom in the playfield. Generally, you also want to couple negative mini with positive flip to avoid overlap with 2 players active and cutoff on the screen edges. I've found that a good ratio of negative mini to positive flip is 10:1. Positive percentages of mini will zoom out the playfield. Let's define the default zoom of the playfield as 1. At 100% mini, the playfield is at 0.5 zoom. At 200%, the playfield is completely zoomed out, with a zoom of 0. Anything beyond 200% and the zoom turns negative. When something has a negative zoom, the image is flipped both horizontally and vertically, and this is no exception. When we go to 400%, the playfield now has a zoom of -1. The targets are exactly where they were before mini was applied, but now the notes are flipped and they are coming from above the targets. The judgments are zoomed at 0 and the playfield is zoomed at -1. This is because the judgments are affected differently than the playfield. If we keep pushing past 400%, the judgments come back, but now they are also flipped upside down and backwards because of a negative zoom. There are some interesting effects that can be achieved with percentages like these, but I'll save that for a future video. Now let's take a look at flip and invert. Negative percentages of flip will spread out the targets horizontally, while positive percentages beyond 100% will flip the target order normally, and then spread out the targets. Invert transposes the left and down columns and the up and right columns. With positive percentages, the left and up columns move over to the right, while the down and right columns move over to the left. The amount of percentage used determines how far the columns move. Negative percentages move the left and up targets to the left, and the down and right targets move to the right. There are multiple combinations of flip and invert that can result in different target orders. We'll go over that in a future video. Let's move on to tornado. With tornado, the notes move in a helix-like pattern as they approach the targets. Each column has its own unique curving pathway. Higher percentages increase the width of the curve. Negative percentages invert the curve for each note pathway. This causes the notes to curve outward from the normal vertical bounds of the note field. That's all there is to know about tornado. Next up is beat. Beat makes the targets bounce back and forth every quarter note, and the notes are slightly affected as well. Percentages determine how far to the sides the targets and the notes go. With positive percentages, beat shifts the targets to the right for every first and third quarter note, and to the left for every second and fourth quarter note. With negative percentages, this is inverted. When dealing with BPMs at and above exactly 300, the frequency of beat will be cut in half. The effects of beat will only occur every other quarter note. At BPMs at and above exactly 450, the frequency is cut to 1/3. This pattern continues on for every 150 BPM. That wraps it up for effect mods. Now it's time to dive into the fade mods. There are quite a few things you need to know about fade mods in general, but let's start off with fade in and fade out first. As a heads up, I'll have to bounce around when talking about the properties of these modifiers, since they complement each other in several ways. At 100%, the fade area makes the notes completely invisible. At 50%, the notes turn completely white in the fade area. For positive percentages higher than 100%, the fade point is made sharper. Now let's talk about the offset mods for a moment. The offset mods control where the fade points are. Negative percentages move the point closer to the targets, while positive percentages move the point further away. When you have both fade in and fade out active, the fade points naturally move, depending on your percentages for each mod. You can still manipulate the fade points easily with the fade in and fade out offset mods. Invisible does not have a fade point. It simply covers the entire field aside from notes that have already passed the targets or notes that are just starting off with boomerang. Negative percentages of invisible serve mainly to negate the effects of fade in and fade out, but you can also use lower percentages with those fade mods to achieve the same effect. Let's go over to blink for a moment. You don't have to worry about manipulating blink too much. Just like boomerang, blink is not affected by attack rates and percentages. However, invisible can be used to alter the appearance of blink. Blink is like a controlled invisible. If you use invisible with negative percentages of fade in and fade out, you will have a fade area confined to the middle of the note field, instead of one visible area. Since there is a midpoint in which the notes are outside the range of both fade areas, assuming that the offset mods are set to default, inverting the fade areas will produce an invisible gap in the middle. There isn't anything to go over as far as handicap, turn, and insert mods go, so let's jump straight to the hide mods. Now it's time for the final section, the hide mods. There are 3 hide mods: hide targets, hide judgment, and hide background. There isn't too much to go over with hide targets. With positive percentages from 0 to 50%, there is no noticeable difference. Any negative percentages will not affect the targets as well. Beyond 50% is where you will be able to notice the transparency. Anything higher than 100% will not affect the targets any differently than 100% will. The only thing to keep in mind is that if you do decide to use high percentages, it will take extra time to transition to a different percentage that will actually have a visible effect on the targets. Hide judgment is a simple one. It's either on or off, just like boomerang and blink. When hide judgment is active, all judgment explosions that aren't misses will have the fantastic color explosion. And finally, we have hide background. As stated in the first episode, hide background is not affected by attack rates. It directly changes the background brightness. You can use negative percentages to change the background brightness to 100%, or you can use positive percentages to darken it. And that covers it for this episode. Now that you know how the mods work with varying percentages, the next episode will cover some advanced mod combos. Now we're really starting to get into the fun stuff.